Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Talking Success. You can see I'm kind of sitting here in a scarf. It's freezing in Joburg. I know it's freezing in Cape Town as well. I've just spoken to a colleague there, so excuse the scarf. It feels like I'm back in the UK. I'm joined with by Rins Jacobs, who is originally from the Netherlands, so he probably knows a little bit about the weather as well and how cold it can be sort of back in Europe. I don't know where you are at the moment. I think Cape Town, is it freezing there as well?
No. I'm definitely wearing the short sleeves
Oh
today, so
wow!
I'm cheeky
Oh,
and
very nice.
right now
Very,
in southern
very nice
Spain, so
indeed.
I'm lucky with
Well,
the
look,
weather.
guys, today we're talking about sort of SME banking. And I know we've covered a little bit of this over the podcast over the last couple of years. We've had numerous conversations with sort of banks and maybe other fintechs that are looking at the sort of gap between what the incumbent banks offer and then what fintechs can offer in terms of SME banking. And I think personal opinion is there's a big area for disruption, certainly in the South African market. So Rins has kindly agreed to join us from Zazu. I'm going to let him do a full intro, and then we're going to sort of unpack this as best as we can today for you in terms of what the opportunities are, where the market's heading, what are perhaps some of the challenges where it comes to legislation, where it comes to sort of compliance, where it comes to sort of product offering, and then really talk about what the future looks like and where Zazu hopefully can make a big impact. So, Rins, listen, thanks so much for joining from southern Spain. I'm a little bit jealous, but summer over there at the moment.
Yes. No, thank you very much for having us. Very keen to talk a bit more about what we have learned, what we've seen in the South African banking and fintech space in the last year and a half, I think, by now already. And indeed, well, maybe taking a quick step back and understanding where I come from in all of this picture. So, being in the European fintech space, right, for close to a decade, um, was setting up a German white label bank or banking as a service engine, Solaris, and with that, getting to see a lot of different flavors of fintech propositions, right? So really early stage guys, all the way to very established companies like Samsung and American Express, and was lucky enough to really work on hundreds of different solutions. That's also where I met my co-founder Germain, who
Yep.
lives in Cape Town and who is indeed wearing the big sweaters now already. And we said to ourselves, look, we are missing a little bit this daily feeling that you have a true impact, that you're building something awesome, right? Because it becomes more
Mm.
normal to once you have an established business going. So we said, what do we take the knowledge that we have and apply that into a market where we see a lot of opportunity, right? And then very quickly you come, of course, to the African continent when it comes to fintech, and digging even a bit deeper, looking actually at three very particular dimensions of the fintech market. We looked at the regulator, like how robust, but also how keen are they for new innovation. We looked at the type of SMEs that exist in the country. So in South Africa, you traditionally have a bit more service-oriented, tech-savvy players already. And then the type and the number of SMEs, as well as new SMEs, that's being generated every year. So there's a ton of SMEs being generated every year in South Africa. But what you also know is that most of these business owners don't particularly have a PhD in finance, right? So how do you help these companies understand what their financial health really looks like? And for us, the best way to add to that is by setting up an SME neobank, or rather a finance hub, but starting out as a neobank with your account, cards, and payments, but also helping them understand, again, how does your financial health look like? How do you visualize that data? And how do you suggest the right next steps for them? And that's something that we haven't really seen on the one hand in the continent, but also not in the country. We haven't really seen somebody taking on the core of the big banks, right, which is the deposit taking, the account and card management. You see some bits and pieces on different pieces of the continent, but in South Africa, we felt that even though rebundling has started, we haven't seen yet the new banking
Amazing.
side truly kick
I'm
off. So
interested to know.
that's what we're here to
Again, this
build.
is not a prepped podcast. We don't. I don't give anyone sort of the questions in advance. So, out of all the countries globally, I don't know how many there are. Certainly 54, 55 in Africa, depending on who you're asking. Why South Africa specifically? I mean, you just kind of touched on that in terms of maturity of SMEs or in tech, but I imagine there's lots of similar
Mhm.
markets, and I think you know. historically, if you speak to fintech founders from outside of South Africa, they're kind of a little bit scared off by regulation. I think we're in one of the sort of most heavily regulated countries, kind of globally, certainly when it comes to banking legislation. So, what made you guys go, actually, yeah, we're going to take that on, and it's South Africa?
Right. Well, we come from like the German banking scene, which is known to be, or notoriously known for being quite heavily
I won't mention
regulated as well. So
Wirecard.
that might give us actually an edge. Um,
Yeah, no, no.
yeah, please don't. We had our own headaches with the whole fiasco. But no, indeed, we looked at a couple of different markets, and one thing is, right, in some markets you see that the regulator is still very closely tied to the big banks, right, and they kind of want to protect their bubble. And so that wasn't really as interesting for us. Or then you need to maybe have particular ties into the regulator or into government functions, and that's something that, of course, we don't have. What we did see was a thriving community, thriving fintech community already in South Africa, right? You have like all the awesome players that exist here, whether it's Lula, whether it's Ikoka, whether that is Yoko, all of which have started out in South Africa, kind of have stayed in South Africa because the market itself is big enough, right? With roughly 60 million people, is big enough to sustain a business. But it's also a nice stepping stone for a European person or a European founder like us to come into Africa, because there's more similarities between South Africa and Europe than probably with most of the other jurisdictions in Africa. So that was a big aspect for us. Language played a part, because we could look at Francophone Africa, right? You could look at a Maghreb region, but that might be a bit more tricky, especially for me not speaking any French. And so that resonated well. And again, the research that we did, we looked at the SME space itself. That was very, very successful. So we actually flew over to Durban, to Joburg, to Cape Town, and actually just walked on the shopping streets and just knocked on different doors and started to ask them about their banking experience. And you get the most horrific stories about that, having to wait in line, or even for a virtual card, they had to go to the branch. We went to different co-working spaces to talk with let's say, more tech-savvy founders, and there we heard very similar stories. And then when we pushed a bit our first idea, this was beginning of last year, we very clearly heard that there was a big need in this market. And knowing that there's some banks out there in South Africa already that are doing this alliance banking model, right, or banking as a service, you would call it in Europe, that gave us a clear path to market. So that was for us a clear way of saying, yes, it's a regulated market, but it also brings a certain stability into what can be offered and a certain guidance in what's possible, what's not possible. So that's where we also have close connections with the SARP at the moment to actually, even though we're not licensed ourselves, we do encourage that.
It's
that
interesting.
engagement
You talk
and that
about
interaction with the regulator.
kind of the landscape here in terms of incumbent banks and some of the fintech players that are that have various different solutions for SMEs. Sorry, my notifications are going off. I thought I turned them off. That have different sort of service offerings, different products for SMEs. And you mentioned kind of a term which was kind of bundling and unbundling. What are you seeing, or how do you define what that is? If people are
Mhm.
listening to this sort of podcast and going, "Oh, I'm not sure what that means," what is sort of bundling and unbundling in your world?
Right. So when you look at the traditional bank, right? Like any of the big boys, they are known for doing everything: mortgages, lending, accounts, savings, cards, trade finance, and everything else. And to be truly exceptional in each of these pieces is rare, right? So typically a bank has a particular focus, but they do other services on the side. And what you have seen, especially in the European and the US space, already 10 years ago, is that fintech started to come alive and started to pick onto the small pieces of the bank and started to take away a particular type of lending, a particular type of card management. So slowly but surely, they started to unbundle the services and started to offer very particular services for a specific set of customers, instead of building out a large monolith that tries to compete on all fronts with the big banks, because then you're going to spread yourself way too thin. So that's the unbundling, right? So like decouple all the different services and kind of restructure them, or redesign them to make them fit for the current day and age. And that's the first piece. But what you then deal with is a lot of fragmented tools. So then you deal with a lot of what we internally call data islands, right? So you have like 7, 8 different logins for your accounting system, for your lender, for your banker, for your anything else. And that's creating a lot of issue for your regular business owner who says,
Mm.
well, I don't really know how to reconcile all this data with each other. And that is where the next wave of fintech came in and said, well, we're going to rebundle all of this again. We're not going to build everything ourselves, but all of these specialized players, we bring them together so that we can still benefit from those thought through new processes and actually work more on partnerships instead of believing we need to build everything ourselves. And that's where the big fallacy of the bank comes in, where their typical mindset is we need to do everything ourselves. It is our data, it's our way of doing it. We don't want to partner too much because we're afraid customers would leave. And that is where that mindset needs to change quite rapidly. So that rebundling of services is what is a big proposition on our side with our marketplace, where we do encourage the data sharing, where we do encourage partnerships with, again, the likes of Ecoca, GovChain on the digital corporation side, accounting platforms, so that any business can actually make
So
use
aside from the
of
sort of the
services that are fit for
analytics,
purpose.
which sounds like that's a big part of Zazu, which is being able to get I suppose a 360 view of the finances of the business, whether it be from payments, so from acquiring, whether it be all the way through to getting a loan from a Lula, whether it be for what other services you may get, and maybe use QuickBooks or Xero or Sage or whatever. You're getting that sort of that single view from your primary bank account. What is the customer experience? So does the customer then need to sort of integrate all of this? Is it very simple? Is it just literally click a button, say, integrate my Lula account into my Zazu account, and it's all sort of displayed there? How does that work in practice?
Yeah. So there's different steps in how we approach this, right? And there we also need to be honest with ourselves that
Sure.
resources are limited in that regard, especially as an early stage company. So what we first said is, well, first of all, we want to make sure we have those partnerships set up. Um, so we have a handful of, for example, on the lending side, we have a handful of lending partners. And on the one hand, we have that one customer profile where we know the transaction history of that customer, we know what industry they operate in, and so on. So we can then tell that customer, well, dear customer, we would suggest you to apply for a loan at Lula, or for a loan at Merchant Capital, or Flow 48. Depends on, right, what might be a best fit for them. And the information that we are then getting back from the lenders is, right, the loan is approved, the loan is not approved, or this amount, or this interest rate, so that we can then slowly start to better understand
Sure.
what the conversion rates look like for that particular type of customer. So then you as a customer don't need to go and apply 3, 4, 5 times for each of those loans, but actually just once we have the profile ready for you, and we can just shoot that out, and then whatever lender says yes to that will then give you that loan. So that is one way of looking at how we would simplify the system. When it then comes to interacting with that on a daily basis, on the
Sure.
lending side, you don't need to interact on a daily basis, but on the payment side, for example, you might. That is where we would look first at how popular are some of these tools before we would then very deeply
Yeah.
integrate them, because otherwise we would just integrate for the sake of integration, which doesn't help either. And so then you need to be very customer steered by understanding what do we build next, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about that in a second, but that's where I think community and early
Yeah,
champions are
absolutely.
very
I
key
mean,
to actually
I
help
think
us
it's
drive the
interesting. You look
roadmap.
at the banking landscape. Well, sorry, no. Let me rephrase that. You look at the challenger or neo-banking landscape here in South Africa. I think it's no secret that we've got Discovery Bank that are looking at opening up SME banking, Time Bank that are looking at SME banking. You've got Revolut, which I think no one really knows what their plans are. But if they offer the sort of same suite as they offer in other markets, then again, that's probably something to keep an eye on. How are you guys going to remain sort of different? How are you going to differentiate yourselves? Because it's set to be very competitive, and I think with some of these retail banks that have got in large large customer bases, they've kind of got that acquisition or part of that acquisition strategy. So, how are you guys going to sort of keep up and make a difference?
Yeah. So there's a couple different angles in how we look at this. So you have your B2C oriented customer, right? So, or bank like a Discovery or like a actually Revolut falls partially on that as well. And what they often do is try to retrofit the retail proposition into a banking business banking proposition, and that is not always really working out. And that's what you have seen with N26, with Revolut, with others in the European space, where yes, some SMEs will use their services, but the real big serious SMEs, they won't be using these kind of B2C
Mm.
neobanks that kind of reformed themselves into a B2B proposition. That is one aspect. When you look at some of the other players, some of the other fintechs that say we started out as a payments company, for example, and now we want to broaden our horizon and become a neobank because we're sitting on 10,000 SMEs already, so it's an easier upsell.
Yeah.
Yes, makes sense. That story, especially to investors, that story makes sense. But in reality, that becomes quite difficult because the people, the SMEs that you work with, have a particular perception or particular workflow that they work with you on already. And also, when you're looking at the rest of the world, a Stripe or an Adyen, they haven't become the leading SME neobank. They have stayed on the payment side, and they have rather gone very deep into the payment side to get higher margins on their core business rather than expanding broadly and kind
Mm.
of further complexify their systems. Um, on the other hand, we very much welcome the competition. We think it's very much needed. I also think that the big banks, some of them say yes, we're going to focus on the SMEs, but lots of them are not really capable to because they have large overhead, right? They have a lot of people working with them, so they cannot profitably bank many of these what we call the forgotten industry or the very
Yeah.
low end, the freelancers, the 1 to 5, the 1 to 10 SMEs. They don't make enough revenue for the bank to be truly interesting, and that's where we want to make sure we are building out for real pain points, right? So instead of saying, "Oh, we have an account with a sexy design," no, it needs to be really fit for purpose on particular micro segments, right? So they need to be almost hyper personalized solutions to make sure that value that they're
Mm.
perceiving is actually turning into willingness to pay. And maybe a small anecdote on this in the when we're working at Solaris Bank, we were working on a couple of different neobanks to launch. And what we often saw is that the niche neobank, so one that is focusing on a very particular topic, let's say, for example, there was a particular sustainable green
Yeah.
neobank, and they knew that they were not going to capture the largest market share. But what they did know is that the people that do want to work with us and believe in our values, their willingness to pay is slightly higher, and our activity and conversion is much higher on those accounts. So we'd rather be profitable with the 20,000 customers than to not be profitable with the freemium model but
Yes.
sitting on 1 million customers and try to make that profitable at some point. So that's where we're seeing a lot of value in working with the customers in finding the right solutions. And I think the big banks haven't really
Yeah,
picked
listen,
that
I
up
think it's the whole
mindset
sort
wise
of
and product
journey,
wise
isn't
to
it?
do
The
so.
customer experience with the incumbent banks. I'm not going to name anyone specifically, but I know as kind of an SME, business owner, just to try and get anything done, here in South Africa with a bank. I mean, it involves going to the bank and queuing, unless you know someone who knows someone who knows someone. Even then, you still have to go and physically meet someone, and I think that's the barrier. I was talking to someone not so long ago from a large incumbent, and their solution was, well, we'll just make it a nicer experience and give them coffee. I was like, it's not really solving the problem, right? Yeah, it's not really solving the problem.
You have to
I
really
think as an
feel the
SME,
pain,
you
right?
don't
It doesn't
have
solve the
2 hours
problem.
or 3 hours to stand in a line in a bank just to I don't know, change an address or to get a new card or to do whatever. And I think where the fintech, certainly the Lulas of this world and the merchant caps that you've mentioned, I think, and the bridge mounts, where I think they add massive value is that actually from a loan perspective, if I want to then go and get a loan from one of these, assuming I qualify, there's this whole sort of KYC and KYB process is seamless. I mean, it's very, very simple. You do it from your laptop, right? You upload your documents, you do your verification, you're done. You want to try and get sort of invoice discounting or factoring from an incumbent bank. I mean, inside leg measurement plus anything that you've possibly owned, you've got to give over as surety. So I definitely see, where those actually, of course, I see. kind of that's why I do fintech. See where these models lie. I'm interested though in terms, and I don't want you to give away any sort of trade secrets or any IP. So if you don't want to answer this question, I will understand. But if you look at the segmentation of the market, as you were just talking about, there are, I don't know how many millions of sort of SMEs. Some are micro enterprises, some are sole trade, sole props. Some have got a turnover up to X. Are you segmenting by sort of turnover? Are you segmenting by size, by category, by industry? How are you going to go after your niche? You don't have to tell me what the niche is.
Yeah. No, so this is actually very close to our heart, and what's something that we're working on today quite a bit. So we don't really care too much about turnover because that doesn't give us anything. It might give you some more balance if you focus on the higher turnover guys, but other than that, it doesn't really tell you much about the business. There's a couple different views that we have. On the one hand, we look at the type of the number of FTEs that they have in the business. So looking at team management, card issuance, finance managers that might need particular access, or HR people that might need access for the payroll account, right? So that's more looking at what kind of workflow might be relevant for these companies that have a particular size in terms of people that they work with. That's one angle. But that is more looking from the product design. If we're looking at how we're looking at the go-to-market segmentation, that is more looking at very much the micro segments. So we literally sat with, we have like a whole list of like 20, 30 micro segments, right? One of them is e-commerce founders. Another one is taxi drivers. Another one is graphic designers, right? So we just take 30 of them that we find in the market, sit with them for 2 hours, walk them through the demo, really talk about what are the particular pain points you're facing right now. What do we need to do as Zazu to actually make that happen, to actually give you that value and that conversion to actually become a customer of us. And once you get those first 30 customers from a particular segment in there, the idea is to then basically wait for 3-4 months to understand what kind of retention signals or churn signals are we getting from that segment. Only then, if that is a positive signal, we would say, well, now we're going to add 10K, 5K US dollars of marketing dollars into that particular segment, seeing how much of that comes back and if that is truly a pain point for the whole industry, for that whole micro segment, or is that something where we just were lucky enough with those 30 customers, right? And once you then get those first customers with the paid marketing, then you can go deeper into that segment and really fully focus on them. And now the other ones that don't work, you just put them to the side and look, anybody that wants to come in, fine, but we're not pushing marketing dollars in that segment. So that is how you test the market very quickly and understand where do you get the most, where are you most welcome, basically. And also keeps you very close because those early customers, those first 30, they will champion your product. They will talk with their peers about the new solution that they have found. So that is really the beginning of.
It's interesting. We talk about sort of headcount businesses, and I think this is debate that has been sort of going for the last maybe 18 months, maybe not even that long, with the uprise of AI and people building their multi-billion-dollar businesses with like a handful of people. So I think that again, I suppose in more traditional sectors that still applies, right? You still need workforce in order to deliver a service or create a product or whatever it may be. But I guess there's kind of the tech entrepreneurs and the independent proprietors who are graphic designers, who are developers, who are whatever they may be, whatever sort of guys, authors, that they still have a need, right? And that they wouldn't be excluded from the Zazu ecosystem, but perhaps not a customer that you necessarily go and target first of all. But there'd be no exclusion.
There's no exclusion, first of all, and that company, right? That let's say one-man show with the big AI play that we've seen. Right, I think one of the stories was around last week of this guy that sold his business for 80 million after a year of developing. These guys, they don't need all these big workflows because they don't have a finance manager. They don't have a big team that they need to work with. That's definitely one segment that we see a lot of value in, and these would just need an account and a card and off they go, and they don't need much else. Where you still have a lot of businesses that are not in the spotlight, that need a small sales force or that need drivers or that need office managers, right? That need a simple car to buy some chairs for the office. So you still have a lot of these companies that are just part of the industry,
Yeah.
but are not really being focused on because they might not be the sexy industries, but
Yeah,
still
listen, I don't
might
think
want
there's
to have
many
a
people that are
better
going to turn around and
banking
go, I don't want a
experience.
better banking experience. But I think what I've seen over the last decade or so since I've been sort of here in South Africa, decade and a half, is that there is quite a bit of brand loyalty. And I think certainly historically, if you look at maybe the slightly older generation, maybe not the current generation we're in, but there is we bank as a business with X Bank, and that's who we're going to continue with. And I think to move, to set up your another account with a neobank as a consumer, that's pretty easy to do and pretty low risk, right? You can go and set up five, six, 10 different banking accounts. Makes no difference. You just download it on your phone. When it comes to sort of business banking, SME banking, do you feel that's a challenge that people say, hang on, this is literally my, everything's going off into this account. I'm going to need to pay, SARS. I'm going to need to, pay my bills. I'm going to need to pay my subscriptions. I'm going to need to pay all of this. And I need some sort of security that, or some certainty that this is an established, a reputable kind of banking platform. So do you think a lot of your marketing and a lot of the messaging that you're going to be putting out is really more about the authenticity of the platform and forming trust? Or do you think that actually that's just going to happen with the new generation? They're just going to sort of automatically kind of trust fintech?
No, I think especially on the SME banking side, trust and stickiness, as you said, or loyalty is particularly high because you don't deal with the typical psychology of decision making of a consumer. That's one aspect. And fair enough, right? People should ask why should I trust Zazu? I don't know who they are. They come out of nowhere, and all of a sudden they think they're the coolest kid on the block. What right do they have to get my to bank me? So we are very aware of this. And we also know that this is why we are not going to focus, especially in the first year, too heavily on how do you get the existing SMEs from the FNBs and whatnot onto our system, because that's quite a bit of a hurdle and a bit of a pain for them to get going. Right, the debit orders need to change, and all these different things need to be rethought on the platform. So the big thing that we are going after is on the platform. So the big thing that we are going after is become the tech entrepreneurs that want to set up their first business out of uni or out of a corporate role. And so in the onboarding flow we have designed, we actually work with GovChain, one of the digital incorporation companies, right? So they help you set up a business online to actually be there from the start with you. And through that, generate that first trust, the first case studies, the first success stories. And through that, hopefully the goodwill of Zazu in the market will rise. And there's a lot to be said, of course, for the partners that you then also work with, right? So the marketplace partners that we have, most of them we have also marketing partnership with, where we can together either co-create solutions or work on their customer base to convert them in favor of various other things. And if we then are associated as Zazu with the known brands that they already work with and trust, that makes that hurdle a bit less, right? And then you start to get on those customers first, and that's then getting a trickle effect of the rest of the market slowly following suit. That's the intention. So that brings us to the first, let's call it 10,000 customers, and then we want to push into the big strategic distribution players, looking at mobility players, insurance companies, logistics companies that all deal with and have very large SME customer bases. So these are all the tools that we're looking at. But indeed, we need to be very aware and very transparent around how do we make sure that we are trusted. That doesn't mean that we won't make any mistakes, of course, but it's about how do you deal with it? How openly are you sharing these that feedback? And that's, for example, where we are showing our research, right? So a lot of companies, a lot of early stage companies are, of course, doing market research, and they're saying, "Oh no, I'm keeping that market research for myself because that's proprietary." We went the other way around. I said, "You know what? Why not just share that?" So we went to a consultancy company and really said, "Look, here's our research. why don't we just create it in an awesome report and push that for free to everybody that is keen on SME banking in Africa? So that's what we published last week. So that's just a way of looking at the market differently, and just be willing to openly share that in favor of SMEs being able to make better decisions around finance and what banks to use and what banks maybe is not the better fit for them. So
And then
that's
the sort of the other thing I wanted to
SMEs as
ask
well.
you is around the commercial. Again, I'm not asking you to give away anything that's proprietary, but I think one of the big issues that SME customers have with their incumbent banks is, hidden fees, transaction fees, fees for this, fees for that. You want to download a statement, there's a fee. You want to download a historic statement, there's another fee. I think there's not necessarily mistrust, but maybe misunderstanding or lack of clarity around what that sort of fee structure is, and you never sort of know until you get your bank statement. You go, what was that for? And if it's only a few rand here or there, you're probably not going to bother calling the bank. But if it's a few rand over 6-7 years, it mounts up. So what is the Zazu sort of approach to pricing? Again, not asking you to sort of give any sort of necessary figures now, but the sort of transparency element, because I do feel that's a challenge in SME banking.
Yeah, no, that's one of the big items for us to make sure of getting rid of that opaque pricing that you see in the market. Because when we did that research, and we were trying to compare, it's actually a funny story. We were doing the pricing study on how do different banks price themselves and what is the effective price or the effective cost for an SME that is doing an average activity on an account. And we published that together with Yazi, a small research agency in Cape Town, 2 weeks ago. And right away, of course, some of the banks were not very happy with that. And also, rightfully so, one of them said, well, you made a mistake here. And we did make a mistake in that calculation, which we admitted also in the follow-up post. But that just goes to show, even if it's for people like us, not that we are the greatest researchers in the world, but people that truly focus on this are still making mistakes. How are you in the world able as an SME that there's many other things to deal with to figure out what exactly are you paying for? Right? So that is a bit unethical, I think, or at least it's a bit outdated way of pricing yourself. This is also, I think, why there is such a cry for better banking experiences. That experience is not only the UX, it's also the pricing and the transparency of how the company deals with you. So for us, it is very simple, as you would expect from kind of a SaaS business or from a typical fintech. Your 3 bundles: Essentials, Premium, Pro, right? And you get increasingly more features baked into that model. So that's effectively really all there is to it, right? And perhaps in the future there might be additional add-ons that has to be seen. But for the beginning, we want to make sure that you as a business owner understand, I'm only paying this amount and I don't have to deal with anything else. I don't have to worry about changing my PIN on my card or logging in 20 times or 30 times or whatever it may be, which are just silly, right? There's silly ways of pricing. And that is coming back to the previous point that we were talking about, how some of these banks might not be in a position to compete truly with those fintechs on the SME space because they are so relying on that hidden revenue source or that hidden cost source, that if they would be completely transparent and just make that a typical standard subscription fee, all of a sudden they're losing out on quite a bit of a few rents here and there from each customer, still amounts to a couple 100,000 at the end of the quarter.
What's the plan? Where are you guys at in terms of product, go to market? What's the plan? Where are we now? End of June 2025. What does the next 6 months, 5 months look like before the end of the year? What does 2026 look like? What's the plan?
Yeah, so we're gearing up for go live, right? So the whole product is ready. We have a couple companies demo testing the product right now, or alpha testing the product. So that's where the last tweaks are being made. Then there's a couple of T's to cross and I's to dot on the banking integration and the compliance side of things with the KYC flows and so on. And then expecting, of course, to launch in the second half of this year. With then the full year of 2026 fully focused on South Africa only. And we've only talked mostly about South Africa now, of course, but the big vision for us is to be that Pan-African leading SME bank. And 27 or early 28, we would start touching secondary market as well. And we know that that's not particularly easy. So we want to make sure we've ironed out all the typical wrinkles that you get from starting up a business in the first years. And for me personally, the big vision is, how do you make a very local SME or freelancer, how do you make them a continental SME, right? How do you, through the network of banking, once we have 3, 4, 5 countries opened up, how do you make sure that just not just a banking system within that country, but actually is part of a larger network where an SME can benefit from the import-export documentation support, from the FX side, from the treasury, from the supply and demand, because maybe that graphic designer that is now in Cape Town and dealing with his cafes and whatnot, there's nothing to say why that graphic designer can also not do that in Egypt or Nigeria or in Kenya, right? So that is where we want to play an active role in enabling and empowering that SME to be continental and truly helping them grow.
That's a big mission,
business.
right?
So that's
I think the complexities of going into different countries, certainly on the continent, the different sort of compliance and regulatory controls, for the forex side, even if it's things like exchange controls, these are big issues to tackle. So I wish you the best of luck.
Right.
Absolutely. Listen, absolutely. And
One needs to
I
dream,
did
though. One
say
needs to
to
dream.
Germain a few weeks ago when I saw him that, listen, sign us up as a customer. We're more than happy to come on board. We have tried to move our bank. I won't say from where to where, but it was not worth the hassle, quite frankly. It really wasn't. So if we do something online, then, hey, you've got another customer signed up for your beta. But listen, it's typical. What I'm going to do within this podcast, everyone's listening. At the bottom, I'm going to put the link to the report that Zazu commissioned and publicised. I think it was last week. I think you just said Red, so it was last week. I'll put that link here. I'm also going to put a link to the Zazu website to get Zazu, but I will put the link here as well. And if people want to reach out to you, not necessarily, well, maybe customers, but sort of potential partners, for instance, where's the best place to find you? Are you a LinkedIn guy? Are you an X guy? Or you okay?
Well, I'm indeed only LinkedIn. I'm not a big social media guy, but the marketing guy says you need to post more. You need to post more. But I'm down in the engine room oftentimes, and no, LinkedIn is the easiest way to find me. So shoot me a message. Typically respond within a day, and otherwise I might be in the beach on Spain, right? But I try to get back to you as soon as possible.
Yeah. Sure, of course it is.
Well, it's only these couple weeks.
Listen, thank you so much. We're going to be watching this with a great deal of interest. I think this is an area of fintech that I can definitely see there's some disruption in. I think when we look at sort of payments and forex, there's a lot happening there. There's a lot of vanilla. There's the whole sort of stable coin side as well, which is a whole nother category. But I think when we look at SME banking, again, as kind of an SME owner, I can certainly see the challenges that you're looking to solve. And you guys are doing a great job so far, and looking forward to the launch. So thank you very, very much. It was great to meet you. We haven't met before, so it was great to meet you. Enjoy the south of Spain. Don't get sunburnt. And I'll try not to get frostbite.
No. I'll be back soon in Cape Town. No, thanks a lot for having us and for allowing me to tell my story.
Thanks so much, Renz.
And looking forward to welcoming you as a customer soon.
Cheers. Bye.